The desert gave nothing easy. It burned and blanched, stripped bark from trees and reason from men. And in the heart of it, in a brittle span of dust-choked land, 3 miles south of Perdition Ridge, a widower named Elias Rourke buried his last good horse. He dug the grave with a broken-handled spade and one bad knee, the July sun wringing salt through his shirt. The horse had twisted its leg in a gopher hole, and Elias hadn't the money nor mercy for a healer. He did what had to be done. The shot had echoed for miles and come back empty. Elias lived alone on 60 acres of dry hush, hemmed in by creosote and silence. His wife, Miriam, had died 2 years prior, a fever that bent her spine and melted her breath. Since then, the house had grown still, a place where things gathered dust instead of purpose. The wind sang under the doorframe at night, and some mornings Elias thought he could hear her humming still, though the sound came from the rafters or his own throat, he couldn't be sure. The girl came one morning, barefoot, blood-caked at the knees, carrying a half-dead dog in her arms. Elias spotted her from the window. At first he mistook her for an apparition, some desert hallucination like the ghost wives drunken men chased towards sunstroke. But she kept coming, steady, not weaving, her eyes fixed like rifle sights on the house. She didn't knock, just stood on the porch and waited. Elias opened the door slow, palm on the butt of his revolver. He was not a man quick to trust. Her dress was torn, brown where it should have been blue, her lips cracked with thirst. The dog, a lean brindle mutt, trembled against her chest, its flank crusted with dried blood. "You Rourke?" she asked, voice rasped raw. "I am." She stared at him, her arms didn't shake, even with the weight of the animal. "They told me you don't turn away strays." "I don't recall saying that." "They said you was kind once." "That was some time ago." A silence. The wind clattered the porch rail. Finally, Elias stepped back. "Come in before you bake." She didn't thank him, just walked past, her shadow crossing the threshold like it had been waiting there all along. He gave her water first, watched as she drank too fast, coughing. She didn't offer a name, and he didn't ask. Names made things stick. He did ask about the dog, and she said it got caught under a wagon wheel near Red Butte. She carried it since morning. "I ain't leaving him," she said. Elias studied the animal, one leg broken, maybe crushed, internal bleeding likely. It wouldn't last the day. He didn't say that, just brought a basin of water and old linens. She cleaned the dog slow, whispering to it like prayer. The animal whimpered once, then settled, eyes slipping shut. Later, when the girl slept on the floor beside the mutt, Elias sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees. He didn't know what god she prayed to or what devils had chased her into his dust-bit world, but something had brought her here. A thing not yet spoken, but carried in her shoulders, in the stubborn set of her jaw. Elias knew trouble when it wore a face. He'd worn it himself not long ago. In the middle of the night, the dog died. She didn't cry, just wrapped it in a flour sack and buried it behind the barn, where Elias had once planned a vegetable patch that never took root. She stood at the grave like she was waiting to be struck by something, but the sky remained still. That evening, she told him her name, Sylvie. He nodded once, "Elias." "I know." He said nothing more, neither did she. The sun dipped low, carving long shadows across the hardpan. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled, and both of them listened without moving. In the morning, she was still there, so he let her stay. He told himself it was for her sake. A girl like that wouldn't last a week alone out there. He told himself he didn't care what she ran from, that he was just doing what a decent man should. But that was a lie. The truth was, when she buried that dog, something in him had shifted. Not healed, no, the wound of Miriam was too deep for that, but stirred, a flicker in ash. Sylvie worked like someone with something to prove. She mended old fence lines, swept out the barn, patched shirts with thread barely thick enough to hold. She didn't speak unless she had to, but when she did, Her words were sharp, deliberate, like stones placed carefully along a river path. Elias found himself watching her when he should have been mending tack or checking the water lines. He didn't trust it. Didn't trust the pull in his chest when he heard her hum to herself, low and tuneless, like someone remembering music more than singing it. She began drawing in the dirt with a stick, circles and lines and strange symbols that looked too precise for a child. He asked her once what they meant, and she said, "Just maps." Maps to what? Back. That was all she said. By September, she had taken to walking the ridge alone at dusk. Elias warned her about the snakes, the cougars, the men worse than either. She said nothing, just kept walking. Each time she came back whole, silent, her face tight with thought. She was hunting something, though he didn't know what. Then came the night she didn't come back. Elias waited until full dark, then saddled the mare and rode out, lantern in hand, heart thudding like a war drum. He found her at the edge of the gulch, staring down into a dry creek bed. Her dress was torn again, her knuckles bloody. At her feet was a man, dead or near it. Rope burns on his throat, bruises blooming purple and black across his chest. She didn't look at Elias, just said, "He knew my name." It was the first time her voice had shaken. Elias didn't ask questions, just pulled the body into a ravine, covered it with brush, and led her home. She slept for 3 days straight. When she woke, she told him the truth. The house felt colder after her confession, though the stove was burning and the shutters drawn tight against the late autumn wind. Elias sat at the kitchen table, fingers curled around a chipped mug, watching steam rise from black coffee that tasted like scorched dirt. Sylvie stood across from him, pale and upright, her hands flat on the table like she was bracing for a sentence. "He was one of them," she said, "the ones who came for us." She didn't flinch as she said it. Her voice had grown steadier since waking, low and clipped like someone reporting on a storm already past. Elias didn't ask who us meant, didn't need to. "How long ago?" he asked instead. 7 months. She didn't sit down. Didn't drink the water he set out for her, just stared out the window where dawn was a smear of rust against the horizon. "They burned the wagon," she said. "Shot my brother first, then my ma when she ran to him. There was a man named Tabard. He laughed when he did it. I remember his teeth, gold on the bottom row, like coins melted wrong." Elias listened without blinking. He could feel the cold edge of the rifle stock beneath the table. A part of him wanted to ask what kind of girl remembered the color of a killer's teeth. Another part already knew. Sylvie had not stumbled onto his porch by accident. He let the silence stretch. Outside, the wind combed through the grass in dry strokes. There were no birds this time of year, no song, just the sound of grit against wood. "I followed him after," she said. 2 towns over. He'd shaved, grown out his hair. Thought he could change his shape, but he still wore that same belt with the brass buckle. "And the others?" Elias asked. "Still out there?" She turned toward him then. Her eyes were the color of riverbed stone, the kind worn smooth by years of running water. "I ain't done." Elias believed her. That winter came down hard. Snow fell thick enough to muffle the world, and the desert transformed into something ghost-white and skeletal. The porch sagged under the weight of ice, and the wind keened through the canyon like a woman lost. Sylvie didn't speak much in those months, but she watched everything. She learned how to clean and oil a rifle, how to field dress a rabbit, how to stitch a wound so it wouldn't turn bad. Elias taught her without words, showing her the old ways like passing down secrets he hadn't meant to keep. She absorbed it all. At night, she drew her maps. The kitchen table became a patchwork of names and towns, marked in charcoal and ink. Places she'd passed through, taverns where she'd heard whispers, men's names spoken like curses, Marlowe, Deke, Brist, and always in bold and black at the center, Tabard. Elias tried to ignore the feeling that grew in his gut. He had taken her in, yes, but what she carried, what she planned, was something larger. It pressed against the walls of his house like floodwater behind a dam. In late February, the traps he'd set along the creek caught something strange. A man, limping, clothes torn by thorns and frost, wandered into the property after triggering one of the snares. Claimed he was a merchant, lost and near frozen. His story bent too easily under questions. Sylvie didn't speak to the man. Just watched from the shadows, her arms folded tight across her chest. That night she knocked once on Elias' door and said, "He followed me here." Elias didn't argue. He trusted the way her voice scraped when she said it. The next morning the man was gone, so was Elias' skinning knife, and 2 bullets from the box he kept beneath the floorboard. They found the tracks by noon. Elias went alone, rifle in hand. Sylvie wanted to come, but he told her no, not yet. He came back by dusk, empty-handed. She didn't ask what happened. But that night, Elias caught her burning something in the stove, a scrap of paper, maybe, or cloth. It turned to ash too fast to know. By spring, she had grown into herself in a way that startled him. She was taller, leaner, and her eyes no longer darted to the corners of rooms. She carried a blade at her side, one Elias had carved a handle for out of deer antler. She wore it like it had always belonged there. Then came the riders, 3 of them, dust-bitten men with hard faces and glinting boots. They didn't ask permission to approach the house, just came straight up the hill like they owned the land. Elias met them on the porch with his rifle cradled loose in one arm. The tallest spoke first. "We're looking for a girl," he said. "Young. Brown hair, walks like a wolf." Elias spat into the dirt. "Ain't seen one like that." "You sure? Think I'd forget." The man smiled thin. "She's got a bounty on her, real special, governor's seal." Elias didn't flinch. "Not interested in government favors." They left without firing a shot, but not before the tallest man turned and said, "If you see her, Rourke, best think twice. She's killed men." After they rode off, Elias went inside. Sylvie was in the barn, carving something into the wood post with her knife. He didn't ask what she'd done to get a bounty. She didn't offer it. Some truths were heavy enough to carry in silence. That night, Elias sat on the porch alone. The stars hung thick above the canyon, and the wind was warm again. He wondered what kind of man he'd become, helping a hunted girl sketch blood across a land already soaked in it, but he knew the answer. He'd been that man the moment he let her inside. The letter came folded into fourths, tucked beneath a stone beside the well. No name on it, just 3 words scratched in slanted ink: "I remember you." Elias found it before dawn, when the sky was still bruised and quiet. He read it once, then burned it in the firebox while Sylvie slept. She didn't ask if it was for her. She didn't need to. By May, the maps had grown teeth. Red circles marked sightings. Lines stitched from saloons to rail stations, from cattle towns to outlaw camps. Sylvie moved through them like a cartographer chasing old ghosts. Each mark carried weight, a story, a hurt, a debt not yet collected. Elias didn't try to stop her anymore. He showed her how to saddle the old mule, how to wrap a pistol in canvas and tuck it under oats, how to speak to station agents without drawing too many eyes. He gave her coin when he had it and silence when he didn't. She left for the first time 2 weeks after the letter. Rode east to Burn Hollow, where a man named Deke was said to deal cards with bloodied fingernails. She came back with a cracked lip and a new coat, one too large for her but lined in fur. She didn't say how she got it. Elias didn't ask. But that night he oiled the revolver she now kept under her pillow and showed her how to fire at distance, past the post, beyond the tree line. After that she began leaving more often. Never long, 3 days here, a week there. She always came back. Each time she returned, something in her was harder, not colder, just more exact. Once in August, he found her stitching a badge into the inside of her saddlebag. It was dented, flaked with rust. She said the man who wore it had tried to trade her for a night's lodging near Caldera. She'd let him make his offer. Then she'd taken his badge and left him bleeding in a dry creek bed. Elias poured her a drink that night, not to toast, to mark the passage. There were things she wouldn't say, not out loud. But the stories were etched into her shoulders, in the way she braced for doors to open, in the way she never sat with her back to a window. She was changing, and Elias knew the shape of it too well. He'd changed once after the war, after Miriam's stillbirth, after too many funerals. Hard things carve quiet men, but there was something different in her, a kind of clarity he never found. Then came the stranger. It was near the harvest moon. A figure limped up the drive with a pistol at his hip and a bullet wound in his thigh, said his name was Finch, said he was a friend of Tabard's once before things soured. Sylvie stepped out of the barn, knife already in hand. "You tracked me." "No," the man said. "I ran. They're coming for you, all of them." Elias stepped between them. Finch didn't flinch. He looked half-starved, his coat hanging off him like old skin. "He's got a bounty, too," Finch said, pointing toward Elias. "From the old days, from before he grew that gray." Elias didn't deny it. Sylvie lowered the knife but didn't sheath it. Finch slept in the barn that night on a bed of hay and old regrets. In the morning, Sylvie was gone again. This time, she left a note. "South, Tabard's in Crosswell. I'll finish this." Elias didn't follow. He watched the dust trail vanish over the ridge, then went inside and opened the cellar. He hadn't gone down there in years. The trunk was still under the floorboards, wrapped in canvas. Inside. His old coat worn at the elbows, his service revolver, a pocket Bible with blood on the spine, and a photograph of Miriam, younger, laughing at something just outside the frame. He took only the coat and the gun. Then he waited. 5 days passed. On the 6th, Finch vanished, left the wound dressing on the fence post. One of Elias' horses was gone. He knew then the time for waiting was done. He rode south, past the bluff where Sylvie had once buried her dog, past the river bed that no longer held water, past the border town where Miriam used to trade cloth. Each step of the mule felt like pulling a nail from old wood. Crosswell was a mean town, all sharp roofs and crooked law. He arrived at dusk. The saloons were lit up with laughter too loud to be honest. He tied the mule outside a feed store and walked into the wind. He found her in the alley behind a butcher, knife slick, shirt torn. 3 men lay slumped against the wall, one of them still breathing. Tabard, his teeth were shattered. Gold gleaming under blood, Elias didn't speak, just looked at her, at the tremble in her fingers, at the wound across her cheek. She didn't weep, just stared at the man gasping on the ground like he was less than meat. "I waited," she said. "I know. I didn't want you to see. But I had to." Elias walked to Tabard and crouched. The man was barely conscious, but his eyes fluttered open. "You hurt her," Elias said, "so you're done now." He pressed the barrel against Tabard's chest. Didn't look at Sylvie when he fired. She didn't turn away. They left the body where it fell, rode out before dawn. They didn't speak for hours. Finally, as the sun rose behind them, she whispered, "I thought killing him would feel like something." Elias nodded. "It never does," he said. "The killing changed nothing, and it changed everything." They traveled west after Crosswell, past the rusted mine shafts and thorn hills, into lands too barren for law. The soil turned gray. The air picked up the coppery scent of storms that never came. Sylvie stopped drawing maps. She burned the last one in a gulch lined with shale, watching it curl into ash without a word. The vengeance she'd carried like marrow had found its mark, but the weight hadn't lifted. If anything, it settled deeper. Elias saw it in her eyes, the way she studied people now, not for threat but for truth. She no longer looked for enemies. She looked for meaning and often found none. They came upon a town called Barlow's End, little more than a mill, 2 saloons, and a chapel that hadn't seen a sermon since the cholera. Elias found work fixing axles and mending fences. Sylvie took up work at the tannery, where the owner didn't ask about the scar on her neck or the calluses on her trigger finger. At night, they stayed in a lean-to on the outskirts, fire low, boots never far from reach. They didn't speak much those weeks, but comfort lived in the silence between them. One evening she asked, "What did you lose?" Elias didn't pretend to misunderstand. He stirred the fire with a stick and stared into the coals. "Everything worth keeping," he said. "Wife, child. Then the man I used to be. You ever think of getting it back?" "No, just learn to live with what's left." Sylvie nodded slow. "I don't feel clean," she said, "even after." "You won't. But I don't feel weak no more." "That's what they feared," Elias said. "From the start." Weeks turned to months. The tannery closed. The mill burned. Most folks fled when the storms finally did come, full of sand and lightning that cracked dry trees in half. Sylvie and Elias stayed. They'd learned not to run. But peace, if it could be called that, didn't last. Word traveled, slowly at first, by drifters, by bounty slips nailed to tree posts. A name, Sylvie Rourke, not the name she'd been born with, not even a name she'd taken. But the one they gave her now, spoken with fear by those who remembered Crosswell and the Butcher's Alley. She hadn't asked Elias to call her that, but when she did, he didn't correct her. "You carry the name now," he said. "What it means, that's yours to shape." But a name is a flare in dark country. They came again, not bounty men this time, but ghosts with skin, survivors of the old crew, kin of Tabard. Men with broken codes and stitched wounds, carrying hate like inheritance. The first came at night, tried the door. Elias shot him through it without rising from the chair. The second came a week later, poisoned the well. Sylvie found him in the brush, blade at his throat before he could speak. She left him breathing, but only just. The third came with fire. They saw the glow before the smell, smoke rolling over the ridge like a wave too large to escape. The Linta was gone in minutes, so were their stores. They didn't run. They moved, back east across the lands they'd once fled, retracing old paths, passing graves they'd made and those they hadn't. They camped on the ridge where she'd first walked to his door. "It started here," she said. "No," Elias answered. "You started here. That other part, it just ended." She didn't reply. Just leaned her head against his shoulder for the first time since the dog died. That night they spoke of the future, not dreams, just shapes. She wanted a place with trees. He wanted to die with his boots off. They spoke of building something. Not a home, something harder, a haven, a place for others who'd walked through fire and come out scarred. In the morning she asked, "Would you still take in a stray?" Elias looked at her long. "Only if she stays." She did. Together they moved north past ghost towns and cracked mesas until they found a bluff over a river that hadn't dried. They built slow, one plank at a time, a barn, then a house. Then a shed filled with tools from a time before all the killing. People came, drifters, orphans, wives who wouldn't be widows again. They didn't advertise. Word found its own road. Sylvie taught them how to shoot, how to listen to wind, how to speak little and mean more. Elias showed them how to plant, how to dig a grave, how to build something you wouldn't want to burn. And at night, when the porch was quiet and the stars were thick, Elias would say, "You were more than a stray, you know." And she'd answer, "I know." But neither of them said the rest, that he'd been the one lost in the dust. And she, the bloodied girl with a dead dog and fire in her bones, had brought him back. The river turned black in winter, not frozen, just thick with silt and shadows, moving slow beneath a crust of frost. The wind carved deep grooves in the land, and the trees bent like penitents under gray skies. They named the place Grafton, not for any old saint or surveyor, but because it meant something stitched, fractured pieces woven into something that could hold. It started as a few shelters along the bluff, then came a schoolhouse, a millstone, a root cellar. Smoke from a dozen chimneys now rose where once there was only the howl of wind. Elias kept to his routines. Mornings he split wood, tended goats, mended walls that didn't need it. In the evenings he sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees, not out of fear but memory. He had learned that watching was a kind of prayer. Sylvie did not grow softer, only sharper in different ways. She listened more, said less. Some called her Miss Rourke now, with a tone that wasn't quite fear but not far from reverence. Children followed her like scouts. Women trusted her with stories they couldn't speak in daylight. Men learned fast to lower their eyes when hers narrowed. She carried the weight of the town not like a leader, but like someone who had borne worse. One afternoon a rider came up from the south, dustsick, coat torn, his horse near collapse. He carried nothing but a name, spoken with care, Ada. Sylvie stepped outside the mill house where she'd been overseeing a new pulley line. She didn't blink. "She's mine," the rider said. "Took her from me in Elridge 3 years past. I've come to collect." The girl he pointed to was 7, small for her age, with one eye swollen shut from a long-heeled break. She stood behind Sylvie, silent, her fists curled tight. "You beat her like a stray dog," Sylvie said, "and now you want her back because you lost something meaner." "She's blood. She's more than that now." The rider went for his belt. Elias shot the ground at his feet before the man could unbuckle. "Not here," Elias said. The rider spat, left. No one followed, but Grafton changed after that. They began building higher fences, not out of fear, out of defiance. The kind that says, "You've taken enough." Sylvie never mentioned it again, but she kept Ada close. The girl followed her through fields, along riverbanks, into town. She spoke little, but she watched everything. And in her eyes, Elias saw something he recognized, fury cooled to direction. That spring, a plague took the cattle. Then 2 children drowned in the river after the thaw. A woman went mad in the schoolhouse and set fire to the walls before they dragged her out weeping. Grafton held because Sylvie did. She sat with the grieving, stood with the shovels, took no credit but never stepped back. One night, Elias caught her staring into the fire, her jaw clenched like she was chewing old names. "Sometimes I feel it," she said. "The one I used to be, like she's watching me from the other side of the glass." "You ain't that girl anymore." "No," she said, "but she still knows how to find me." Elias poured them both a drink. Later that week, a letter came. Sealed in red wax, the stamp of a circuit judge Elias thought long dead. It bore no address. Only this: "You are harboring fugitives. Your land is not law." Sylvie read it once, then fed it to the stove. "They're coming," she said. Elias nodded. "Let 'em." They prepared, not with barricades or bullets, with plans, signals in the trees, caches buried deep, a way to vanish without leaving smoke. They taught the children how to hide. Taught the old how to stay alive even when they couldn't run. The people of Grafton did not ask for war, but they knew how to survive one. When the riders came, 4 men in black coats with tin stars, they found an empty town, smoke curling from chimneys, bread cooling on windowsills. No bodies, no blood, just stillness, until Sylvie stepped from the woods. She wore no gun, no blade, just a stare sharp enough to crack bone. "We're not yours," she said. "You're wanted." "For what?" she asked. "For living too long." Elias stepped beside her. "They can't hang what's already dead," he said. The first shot didn't come from either of them. It came from the ridgeline, Ada, rifle in hand. The shot dropped one rider before he could draw. After that, it wasn't a fight, it was a reckoning. When it ended, the four men lay twisted in the dust. Sylvie never lifted her hand. She didn't need to. Her ghosts had done the work. Grafton didn't celebrate. They buried the dead, salted the earth, and sang no songs. But that night, under a sky smeared with stars, Elias said, "I think Miriam would have liked you." Sylvie didn't speak. Just sat beside him, her hands resting on her knees like they held everything she'd ever lost. And maybe, finally, something she'd found. Years passed like the slow winding of a river, not swift, not still, just inevitable. Grafton grew, but never fast. Never wide enough to draw maps or merchants or the kind of men who carved kingdoms from bone. It grew quiet, steady. A forge, a mill, a school rebuilt with stronger beams. People came not for promise, but for permission to begin again if they could bear the weight of their own pasts. Elias grew thin. His hands, once steady as oak, began to tremble when he lifted a hammer. His legs stiffened. His breath shortened. He kept his pain quiet, as he always had, but Sylvie saw it in the way he lingered at the porch longer each morning, in the way his eyes wandered not to the horizon, but to the earth beneath his feet. She never said goodbye. They weren't the sort who believed in goodbyes. One morning in early autumn, she found him in the rocker, hat slumped low, rifle across his lap, eyes closed. The coffee beside him had gone cold. She didn't cry. Just sat down beside him and watched the wind move the grass. She stayed there until the sun dropped below the bluff. Then she buried him under the sycamore tree where he'd once planted a row of saplings that never took. She marked the grave with a stone. No name, no words, just a line drawn deep, sharp across the surface, a scar if stone could have one. Afterward, she walked to the river, took off her boots, stepped into the water. When she came out, she left her gun belt on the bank. The days that followed were lean. The seasons turned. Children grew tall. The trees thickened. The town, held together by hands that had known war and mercy, did not falter. They remembered Elias in stories, quiet ones told on cold nights, about a man who knew when to shoot and when to sit still. A man who took in a ghost of a girl and raised her into something too strong to be buried. Sylvie never left. She became the spine of the town, not its face, taught the children to trap, to track, to read the clouds. She carried no weapon now, but everyone knew better than to doubt what she still could do. Ada took over the forge. Others raised livestock, traded goods, taught letters. Some came to ask questions. Sylvie answered only when it mattered. Once, a boy from outside asked her, "What happened before Grafton?" She looked at him for a long time, then said, "Things I had to carry, and things that carried me." The boy didn't understand, but years later he would. On the last day of her life, she climbed the ridge where she'd first seen Elias' house, now long gone, the wood folded back into the land like it had never been. She sat beneath the old sycamore, now tall and splitting rock with its roots. She had no one to bury her, but she left her boots there, just as she'd found the place all those years ago, barefoot, bloodied, unbroken. The people of Grafton found her the next morning. They didn't weep loud, didn't sing. They planted another tree beside the first, and in time both stood together, wind-worn, weathered, roots tangled beneath the earth, leaves brushing sky. No plaque, no scripture, just two scars in stone, and the life they built in the dust between them.